Well, hi everyone. It's great to have you along to today's session. We're going to be having a chat about use of artificial intelligence, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by John Toon. John and I go back a very long way, and John's very sort of interested in this area and has got lots of interesting sort of tips for how you can use it. So we're going to talk about a number of aspects of that over the course of our discussion. John, you and I go back a long way. Just for those that haven't perhaps seen you online, just tell us a little bit about you and your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I guess you were probably one of the first CPD trainers I think I ever interacted with. Once I'd actually passed my exams, and become a chartered accountant, which is very nice. And yeah, as you say, we keep bumping into each other, which is
Yeah.
very nice. And I've always enjoyed your sessions and stuff that we've had and the interactions that we've had to have. But I guess yeah, a quick potted history of my career. I trained at a small four partner practice in Preston for a long time. Stayed there for just over a decade. And during that time, surprisingly enough, they inevitably got bought by another big firm, which has eventually become part of Assets along the way. That happened after I left. And then I worked very briefly for myself for a period of time doing sort of virtual FD services, then moved back into mainstream practice life and worked for another sort of slightly larger firm with about sort of 7 or 8 partners before ending up at Beaver and Shudders, which is where I've worked for the last just over a decade. And that as a firm that grew from being sort of around about 150 people when I joined to pretty much 300 people, and then had just merged with Menzies just as I left a few weeks ago. And now I find myself at HLB, the head of technology, sort of global CTO for HLB International, which national network of accounting firms, 350 firms across 155 countries. So there's all the big numbers for you. And I guess that kind of move into technology has been something that I've been doing for probably about the last, well, I guess probably a decade or so. I mean, in mixed roles. I've had I've had the typical kind of accounting technology journey insofar as I've had to run a portfolio and kind of accounts and audit alongside doing the technology stuff. And then more recently, with Beaver and Shudders, I then started to build out a digital transformation team and then run our IT function. And I did that for about the last 3.5 years.
You're very sort of active online there, and you're quite a regular podcaster, aren't you? I think I do see
Yeah.
things popping up. So tell us a bit about that.
So I run a podcast and I've been doing that for probably about 4.5 years now. I do that with another accountant friend of mine and then someone else who's worked in the sort of accounting technology industry as well. So Indian Ryan. And yeah, we talk about accounting technology, surprisingly enough, given that's our bread and butter. And yeah, it goes out weekly now. It's called the DigiTools and the Cruel World podcast. So don't blame an accountant for an unimaginative name. But yeah, we try and cover all of the news stories and updates. We do a few interviews and stuff with sort of key people in the industry, whether it's accountancy people or vendors, just to sort of keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on and really just to commentate, I guess, on what's happening. Because as you and I know, Pete, the world seems to be spinning even faster and faster
Yeah.
all the time, and just keeping on top of the latest changes, whether it's new releases from existing vendors that you might be using or just brand new stuff coming to market. We realized a few years ago that it was becoming almost impossible to keep on top of. So we're trying to make that a bit more easy and a bit more consumable. I guess the audience decides whether or not that we're doing that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Right. Okay. Well, let's get into our topic of conversation today. I mean, I talk a little bit about generative AI, I suppose, from the point of view of ethics. I do quite a lot of training on ethics, partly driven by the Institute's requirement for 1 hour per annum, which is good for us in our little CPD space. I want to focus more really on the positives rather than the sort of the sort of the negatives and so on this morning. But what I do find when we do those sessions is we quite often poll people on, how much do you as a firm or individually make use of generative AI day to day? And more often than I would perhaps think would be the case, people are saying, well, no, we just don't do that at all. And maybe what you might call a slightly Luddite approach. Now, again, I'm not against that. What I'm just quite keen to get a sense before we get into sort of the practicalities of how you might sort of use these tools is what do you think the consequences would be for firms? And a lot of our firms that we work with, I suppose, are fairly small firms. Are saying, well, actually, we're not even going to embrace that because we think it's just too risky. Is that something which is a fair call, or could that be quite a dangerous sort of approach to take? Do you think?
I guess probably there's two elements of this. I would suggest that particularly if you ask firm leaders whether or not their firm is using generative AI, and if they're saying no, I would almost invariably say that that's probably wrong. It's just that they're not aware that it's being used, even for a small firm. I mean, there probably will be exceptions to that rule, but even we as a firm, when I was at Beaver and Shuthers, we were aware that this was happening, and we had people using, pretty much every model you could imagine on the market, whether those are approved or not. And we did have a process in place to kind of like try and engage with the right models that we wanted to use and encourage people to use the right things. But I guess this kind of shadow AI kind of concept that maybe people have heard of is very much there. That's the kind of concept of people coming to work, they get stuck on a technical question, and then they go to ChatGPT on their phone if it's not available on their laptop or the computer, and ask a question and then get an answer and result, and then they're giving, spewing that back out into the practice and whatever they're doing. And that is probably more prevalent, I think, than many people come to realize. I think the other side of it, in terms of like just not using this technology, is that unfortunately it's here to stay, whether you like it or not. And so you might not want to necessarily embrace it with open arms, but I think just staying up to date and staying a little bit relevant with the capability of what this thing, what these tools are available and capable of doing, is only the right thing to do, particularly when the other side of this is that probably clients are going to be starting to use this and maybe coming to you. And I know that can be mixed in terms of people's experiences, but I've certainly been challenged in the past by a client asking me about a very technical revenue recognition question, which you would have been all over, Pete. But you actually, coming up with actually a pretty decent response and answer. And really my role went from actually being a sort of a technical advisor to really a validator. And so this is the kind of things that we need to just be aware of. And I think, like any kind of technology, like anything that moves around in our space, just having your finger on the pulse a little bit, just make sure that you're keeping pace with the rest of the market.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, isn't it, around client expectations. If it's a client expectation that you are, at least in some way embracing this sort of technology, then that's going to be an important consideration. Yeah, and we'll talk perhaps about the specifics of the different sort of service lines in a few minutes. For those though that perhaps are maybe a little bit inherently sort of against it, I suppose, or perhaps maybe just very low down the learning curve, is there maybe a couple of practical things people can be having a look at which might get them started and get them incentivized and motivated, just for those that are right at the sort of the bottom of the curve at the start of the journey? Give me a couple.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, I think probably what we've been seeing over the last couple of years or so of generative AI sort of leaping onto the into the news as much as it has, is that a lot of the focus has been about improving personal productivity, and a lot of the use cases that we've seen has been a consequence of that. So we all know that accountants are time poor. We struggle with the day job in terms of getting everything done and meeting all of our deadlines and things. So anything that helps with that kind of level of personal productivity is always appealing, I think. And so, simple things like helping you maybe to draft a difficult email. I've seen juniors in our office who've been asked to kind of respond to, maybe a client not sending information on time, and like, how do they deal with that? I know that they've gone to ChatGPT or something similar to kind of help to draft that in a way that is, polite but firm, and also prompts the client to respond and understand the consequences of that. So something like that is a big time saver, because I know in the past from previous experience, when I've been asked to do things like that, I've probably spent, I don't know, 30 minutes drafting an email that's really about 6 lines long, which is a bit ridiculous. I think there are lots of other things that you can do with ChatGPT. I think that, or again, similar large language models. But the big one for me is about research. We as accountants cannot know everything. It's impossible to know everything, and sometimes we do come across technical things, technical queries or questions that are beyond our existing skill set. And whilst I'm not saying that you should use these to kind of replace an expert, it does at least give you the ability to reframe a question, or at least kind of like do a little bit more research in a way that we would previously have done just using Google, I guess, and get some greater context. And actually, large language models are really great for kind of like bouncing ideas around and sort of questioning a premise and sort of saying, hey, this is my setup. What do you think of this? And then as you sort of develop the conversation, it's like going to and fro with a real person in some respects. And so I think that helps, particularly if you want to not give that advice back to the client, but at least engage with an expert to be able to deliver something that gives you a bit more insight and a bit more of an awareness of maybe the right questions to ask. Because obviously sometimes the devil is in the detail, in terms of we don't know what we don't know, and making sure that we cover all bases for our clients is really important.
Yeah. No, that's good, isn't it? And I think Yeah, so there's a couple of things occur to me there. I suppose one thing that I'm certainly picking up a lot from what I read around sort of the the use and I suppose the sort of the caveats is I remember watched a really good Institute webinar a few weeks ago, and they were saying, almost treat AI like a sort of a very enthusiastic audit junior,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you're not necessarily going to be saying, right, I'm going to sort of ask that question, whatever it comes back, I'm going to spit it out to the client without any query. But it's actually almost saying we need to have a bit of a, we need to sort of try and frame what we already think we know in the light of what that the tool can tell us. So we're willing to challenge it rather than just taking it as gospel. I suppose that seems to be something which I'm picking up on quite a lot.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely. And I think the models themselves have kind of come to realize that people are using these things for research purposes. And in the early days, if you were an early adopter, sort of, 18 months or so ago, you could have asked a question and got a response. And of course, we've seen all the press about, legal cases going to court. We're quoting precedents that didn't exist. And obviously, we've seen some stuff in the accounting industry fairly recently where things have happened. But one of the great things about a lot of these models is they will now give you the references as to where they've pulled this information and the data and detail from. And again, for me, it's like sort of Google on a superpower. We would historically have asked a question, I don't know, how do I deal with VAT in France, for example, gone to Google and got a whole bunch of results, and the French revenue would have been on there, and KPMG and a bunch of others. But we would have to kind of like assimilate and formulate that data in a way that is responsive for us. What we can now do with a large language model is do exactly that. But you get all the references and you get sort of a contextualized response, which I think is much more consumable for me at least and for others. And at least it still allows you then to go and validate and say, hey, they've said, I don't know, French VAT is 19%. And don't quote me on that because I don't know if it's right. But if it's 19%, can I go and check that that's the right correct source? Can I go to the revenue site and just verify that that's up to date? And there are also challenges as well with using these models, because quite often the paid for models are more up to date than the free versions. And so depending on how you access these models and how you utilize them, you do get different responses. And we've seen a whole bunch of horror stories about people getting it to spell things like strawberry or to do basic maths. This is not the function of a large language model. That's not what they're good at. So it's a bit like saying, I drove my car into a field and it got stuck and blaming the car. Well, if you drove a 4x4, you probably won't get stuck. And so using the right tools for the right jobs is very, very important. And having a basic understanding of what these things are capable of is really important. I would also really like to validate that point you made, Pete, about checking this information. We saw the thing about Deloitte fairly recently. I think it was having to give money back to the Aussie government for basically providing a report that hadn't been validated. Well, I don't understand why and how that happened, because in any normal accounting practice I've ever worked in, there's always been a review process. There's always been a manager or a partner or both reviewing the work of more junior staff. And if we're treating a large language model like a junior person, which is exactly how we should be doing it, then those validation points should still be there in terms of just checking that what's being produced is reasonable, it's accurate, it's reliable, and all the other stuff that we kind of expect from a professional.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Without wanting to sort of put you on the hook in terms of, recommend, a particular provider that would be good to use, more from the point of view, if people want to do a little bit of due diligence around, which sort of tools they might use. Certainly, you think, because again, I've heard quite a lot of people say that the paid for models, you're going to get a better quality outcome. I mean, is that something which is a question of investing a bit of time to getting online and just doing a bit of a compare and contrast, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's two things about just going for the paid for models. Number one is that you just generally do get better results. But I think even more importantly is that you more often than not, the paid for models don't train the models on your data when you input it. And they also are probably typically tick all the boxes from a data protection GDPR point of view. And so actually having a paid model, if you want to use it in accounting practice and actually start to use potentially client information or confidential information or anything that's personally identifiable, you've got to be on a paid model of some description. So the only exception to that is Copilot in the Microsoft suite, because both the free and the paid for versions are kept within your tenants, within your Microsoft tenant, and the data doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't train the models. But if you're using anything like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, et cetera, then absolutely being on a paid for model has to be the way forward. There are, again, some exceptions if you host them on your own systems, but that's like probably quite too technical for what we're talking about now. But that's what you've got to do, and preferably the business subscriptions, not the personal subscriptions, because again, there are some slight nuances in how those work. And unfortunately, some of the models offer slightly different features in the personal versus the business subscriptions, which again is a bit frustrating. I mean, ChatGPT is clearly probably the most prevalent and the most well known. Certainly, I saw some stats very recently about the percentages. It is way up there. It's a little bit like using Microsoft or using Chrome or whatever, day to day. After that, Gemini and a few others sort of are in the mix. I did read interestingly from an ICAW point of view, they've been doing some research on the effectiveness of these large language models and doing maths and doing some of the stuff that we would associate with counting. Gemini actually came top on that research. But the problem with these things is the models move on so quickly that if you rely on something even from say 2 or 3 months ago, it's almost invariably going to be out of date because we're moving on so quickly. And just to give you a case in point, ChatGPT was using 5.0 as their model of choice up until about 4 or 5 days ago, and it's literally moved to 5.1, and that's a switch that they moved from the 4 models to the 5 models. I think in about August, maybe July time. So again, about sort of just 3.5 months ago. So things move really quickly in this space, and it's a bit of an arms race at the moment for these models to kind of come top of each other. So my advice to any practice leader or practice owner who wants to kind of like figure out their space in this, make a choice around one of these models. Doesn't matter which one it is, but just make a choice in terms of like, go with the one that feels most usable, that you can understand, and invariably that'll be a good choice for the next few years, because I think the likelihood of like one model outperforming all the others is a little way off in terms of making a poor choice, I guess,
because they're all kind of vying for that sort of that supremacy. So they've all got skin in the game really in terms of making sure that they're evolving what they do.
It's a little bit like when you go to the sort of like the fairground, they have those like horse race things where you have to squirt water into them and everyone kind of like forwards and backwards all the time. It's exactly like that at the moment.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, let's just drill down specifically got on just a couple of maybe individual sort of service lines. So just I'm not asking for a comprehensive list here, but just a couple of things that maybe you think are quite interesting. So if you're thinking about people within firms getting involved in accounts prep, so give me an example of where AI can be specifically quite interesting in terms of that side of things. Is there any little examples you can give us of where, from an accounts prep point of view, it could be a really useful tool?
So I think I mean, this isn't necessarily like LLM powered, although there are elements of it, but we're starting to see products like Silverfin, for example, take a general ledger and automatically map it to a chart of accounts to do accounts production. Now that's not necessarily that new, because Xero had that in Xero Tax for a while, but you could only do it with a Xero product. You couldn't do it with any other general ledger. And a few others have got that, but I think this ability from a working papers point of view to just automatically map, that trial balance that you've got into sort of the framework for a set of accounts is super clever, and it saves a reasonable amount of time. Again, I remember from my days of doing accounts production and stuff, you'd sort of spend a bit of time figuring out, right, how do I take this trial balance here that a client's given me and then map it into the chart of accounts that I want to build my financial statements around. So that's a big time saver and a big way of like automating stuff. We're also starting to see working paper solutions of all flavors starting to validate the data. So a classic one, again, not really LLM powered, but a classic one might be, I've got a business that's made a profit of 100,000 and the directors have taken, or director shareholders have taken 200,000 out in dividends. Is that reasonable? And should we be sort of checking whether or not those are legal, etc. So there are increasing number of validation checks coming into the kind of tools that we use for this. I think what we're starting to see, but this is very much on like the cusp of like new products in the market. We are starting to see some tools around disclosure and aiding the disclosure process, but it is very early days, and that obviously fits both into kind of audit and accounts prep. Yeah. So something there for everyone.
Yeah, and I think I saw something recently. It might, and again, I'm not any more than you are trying to say that a particular solution's right one, but I think it was a little webinar Caseware done about something they got where and it was talking about sort of kind of version control on stat accounts. And of course, it's that
Yeah.
thing, isn't it? I mean, I remember when I trained with KPMG forever ago, and we used to do that thing called calling over, where you'd have a set of accounts, and then there would be some changes put through, and you would literally sit opposite somebody, and you would sort of read it out, line by line, and see if they. But they were saying that if you sort of change one figure in a set of annual report in an annual report, or one disclosure in an annual report, it could have a knock-on effect somewhere else. It's quite a heavy duty, sort of quite a labor intensive process, making sure that version 3 and version 4, that you've not
Oh, yeah.
dropped something out. So that sort of thing, I suppose, as well, to me feels like a quite a good idea in terms of having a tool that will assist with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing more and more of that as well, particularly, like I say, particularly more in the audit space, I guess. But that's I guess a symptom also that from audit practices that are large enough, they'll have clients preparing their own accounts and providing those for the audit process, and those can invariably get a bit messy. Or the classic one is kind of if you're working in the not-for-profit space, quite a lot of accounts almost always end up in Word. And then once you're kind of in Word, managing like change control, particularly the numbers in the financial statements, is always very, very difficult. So yeah, you're right. Caseware have got that. Data Snipper have got that. A few others in the market have got that kind of functionality, and that is a huge time saver. And I guess also depending on the way that you already perform that process. For us at Beavers, that was always quite a high level process in terms of like it typically tended to be managers that reviewed financial statements. So the value in terms of time saved that you can get back is quite significant. I guess if you have a firm that maybe pushes that down the chain a little bit to more junior staff, the value is maybe not quite the same, but it's still a significant time saving. And I've done audits where you get to kind of like version 26 of the accounts, and you start to just lose your mind. And it's like no one needs to go through this pain when you're having to sort of check everything all over again, particularly if you've got a very long set of accounts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. What about tax? I mean, I'm hearing sort of some interesting stuff about sort of providers out there that are allowing organizations, firms, to actually automate a lot of stuff that probably historically has been done sort of manually in the tax compliance space. So is there anything specific you want to say about, or you could say around sort of tax compliance work?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's probably two elements of this that I'm seeing. One is a kind of a research element, which we sort of touched on earlier before. So again, there's a few products coming into market that are really just there to sort of say, hey, rather than you relying on a general model that goes out and does searches the internet for results, we've kind of collated all of the tax information you could possibly imagine. So we've got all of the HMRC manuals, we've got all of the legal stuff, we've got all of the case law, tribunal summaries, etc., etc. And we've collated this together into a model and given you that so that you can sort of ask those weird, complicated questions about tax that come up unusually. And there's a whole bunch of people doing that. Blue Jay are doing it, which is Canadian business, but then also all of the kind of typical providers that we'd be familiar with in the UK have got some kind of data at their fingertips. So whether it's LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters or anyone else really, they're all kind of doing that and got that there. And I guess that is the kind of the next frontier for information, if you like, is that turning it into something that's suitable for a model. The other side of it in terms of preparation and sort of like the actual that actual side of things is that we're absolutely seeing technologies in that space. Again, some of it is not necessarily large language model powered, but it is AI driven. So there are a few tools out there that allow you to do, for example, the extraction of information from anything that a client provides. So it could be a P60, it could be bank statements, it could be an investment portfolio report, it could be pension information, and extract the right information in a structured format so that it can be automatically entered into tax software in the background, and that actual data entry is being done automatically as well. So again, you can see a manual process that took quite a long time in terms of getting something from a client, opening it up, extracting the right information and putting it into software is now starting to be done more automatically. The kind of next level of that, which we're not really quite seeing in tax, but we are seeing in audit, ironically, is to be able to validate the information that we receive from our clients before we start doing the data extraction, and just to make sure that it's right. So a classic example of that might be, if I ask for information for tax and I sort of say to you, hey, Pete, can you send me 12 months bank statements? And what happens is you dig through all your stuff and you send me 10 months. And then I have to come back to you and say, oh, what about the other 2 months? Do you forget about those? And we are seeing tools start to do that and do that in a kind of conversational manner, so it's not quite as rude and as abrupt as I am. And that really helps to save time as well, because again, that's that's a thing that normally someone in the process has to do, whether it's a junior or a senior person, and just takes time, and there's a fair amount of back and forth. I think we're on the cusp of starting to see some large language model powered tax prep software. So this is kind of going to be potentially replacing the existing providers we see in the market. But it is very, very early days. So there is one product that I'm aware of that's in sort of beta testing at the moment with a few firms. And there's another product coming in to kind of actually not replace the process, but overlay over the process to do tax review and validation. So that it will look at the accounts, it will look at the tax computation, and it will sort of say, hey, we've sort of checked it against every piece of information we can find out there, and we noticed that you didn't claim a capital allowance for this. Is there a particular reason for it, for example?
And I guess from the point of view of, yeah, I guess, and then I suppose in terms of that investment from a third point of view, that would be, I guess, quite a big investment if they're going to collaborate with one of those providers. But I suppose then it's all about, well, the payback is the process becomes super more efficient, and if you're doing sort of some of that stuff on big scale, I suppose then it does really going to give you the payback.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things at the moment is like the investments can be quite large, but I think actually don't sort of be overwhelmed by that, I would say, because this isn't for me like a normal technology investment. This isn't like buying your Microsoft licenses or your digital licenses or your CCH license or whatever it is that you've got, in terms of, it is almost a necessary evil, if you like, and you've got to have those to be able to perform the function, the role. This, for me, when you start investing in AI based technologies, is actually really around, you are essentially replacing human capital, you're replacing the human resource in your business. And so you kind of got to look at it in that sort of respect, in terms of like, if I wasn't to invest in this technology, how much would it cost me to employ someone to do this job, or how much is it costing me now to pay someone to do this job, where I could actually, maybe scale my practice up a little bit more and take on some more clients if I wasn't, capped. And so that's the kind of view that I take. I would also say as well is that what I've seen in my experience, again, over the last couple of years, is that a lot of these tools really struggle to price their products effectively. So there has been quite a lot of transition and change, which is very frustrating when you're on the buying side, but also it's a great opportunity to negotiate and sort of figure out what's going on. We appear, and this isn't absolutely set in stone, but we do appear to have kind of moved from a sort of very fixed kind of SaaS-based pricing like we'd be used to with, say, like Xero or QuickBooks, for example, to more of a kind of a utilization or usage-based pricing model with a lot of these. And that is in part driven by the LLMs powering these products, because that's the way that they work. So and again, this makes buying a little bit difficult, because sometimes you've got to figure out your volume. But what you'll tend to find is you'll tend to be able to get into a product and buy for, say, say, I don't know, 500 use cases a year, and then the next price bracket might be 750, and then the next price bracket might be 1,000. And it's quite difficult when you're on the buying side to kind of say, well, how many times am I going to use this product straight away? And so you've got to have a little bit of open negotiation, I think, with the vendors, and they are open to that as well. And they're obviously encouraging people to get on board. So there are incentives and often quite good trials to kind of see what these products can do and see how they work.
Okay, good. That's good. Yeah, I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? If you've got to almost predict how many cases you're going to use, it's quite a challenge. I mean, if people again are looking to, I think that sounds quite interesting from a tax point of view. I might be interested in doing a little bit of looking around, digging around. I mean, is that something you can actually quite easily, just with an hour to spare, just sit down and Google and find some of the providers, or are there any ones you would particularly point people towards? We're not in any way, shape, or form being, incentivized by anybody to talk about any particular providers. But again, people, I think, are keen on the practicalities of these things, aren't they, John?
Yeah. I mean, I would say definitely you can sort of Google these and find some of these products fairly quickly. Some of the mainstream products are starting to build this, so but also some of the mainstream products are encouraging the third-party providers that are doing some of this automation as well. So the big one that I talked about, which is like that data extraction and getting it into your traditional tax software, is a product powered by FD Intelligence, and they plug into CCH, Digita, and Iris, I think. I'm not sure if they connect into any other systems, but those are there for people to utilize. And then if you're interested in sort of the really, really new stuff, there's a product called Record OS, which is a brand new tax system. Like I say, it's in beta testing at the moment, so it's not available to the general public, but that is available and potentially is looking to kind of replace your your personal tax return software at least. And then there's another product called Syntax, which is the kind of tax review system that I talked about. And again, that's just starting to open itself up to the public to use. That's a product that I've been aware of for probably about 2.5 years or so, because I've been building that out for a while.
I think what's interesting from what you said, in this session, is that we got in a way it's quite an interesting time to be looking to sort of tap into this, isn't it? Because obviously there are providers out there, they're all vying for supremacy. They're all wanting people to try there. So in a way, it's not like you've only got one provider and you're going to have to pay whatever. There's some good scope for negotiations, some good scope for sort of kind of shopping around.
And actually, sometimes when you get in early with these products, again, partly because they haven't really figured out their pricing properly, but you can negotiate quite a good deal. But equally, if you get in very, very early and you're providing feedback, you're giving them value back. And so that is a great negotiating tool in terms of like, if you want to be a proactive user, and that does mean you have got to be an early adopter to a degree, and there's obviously a risk in doing that. But if you're an early adopter shaping a product and that product's responsive in terms of like adapting to the feedback and features that you're asking about, then I think that's a huge benefit for practices, particularly smaller ones, because it allows you to be very, very agile, and you can outperform firms that are much bigger as a consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, just quickly, because I don't want to take too much more of your time, John. Talk to me about audit. I mean, I've left audit to audit's an area I'm very passionate about, as you know. Tell me, I mean, is there anything specific around audit in the audit space that you think is worth us just touching on here?
So audit, I would say, is probably one of the areas where there's a huge amount of investment and a huge amount of AI already in use. I mean, we've kind of gone through the data analytics phase. We're familiar with products like Inflow and Mindbridge, etc., and Caseware and others have those products as well. That is ultimately AI powered, even if it's the kind of the boring AI, because it's machine learning and other bits and pieces. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing a whole bunch of AI powered products coming into audit to kind of help with the process of doing that work, and actually, I guess, trying to take the mundane parts of audit away, of which there are quite a lot, as I'm sure you remember, Pete. And so some of the things that we were doing, for example, because we did a big AI project at Beaver Struthers, we were looking at like how do we automate things like research. So anyone that's got to complete an ISO 315 document in terms of like the background and knowledge of and information about a client, if that's a brand new client coming to you, for example, maybe not an existing one, there's going to be a whole bunch of information that you can extract from the internet, from their website, from press and publications, and all sorts of other things. And that kind of work, if you were to do it kind of the traditional route of maybe just Googling it and summarizing information and stuff, takes a long time. And I remember doing ISO 315 docs and research, and taking probably a good couple of days to pull that together. The reality is with a ChatGPT or similar, you could probably do that in maybe like 30 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer. And of course, the great thing is, because it's very conversational, you can keep adding context into it. So when you get last year's accounts, or when you get some more information that the client provides, you can actually put that into the model and get it to extract and analyze that information and provide you more context. And I found that really, really powerful, and found some incredible information. Like, one of the clients that used to deal with, found out some information that I don't think I ever would have found by going back and Googling. Well, I can tell you I hadn't found it by going back and Googling, because it was a new client to us a few years ago. And our ISO 315 document, when we ran it through the model that we built, came up with a whole bunch of information and analysis that we'd never picked up, and some really nuanced, interesting stuff, which is quite relevant to the audit. I think the other stuff that we are tending to see is probably more on the review side as well. So there are elements of stuff that you can do in the field work. So planning probably the main use cases, if I build my logic out properly, in the planning phase is research. That's where these large language models are really great. So ISO 315, laws and regs type docs, those kind of things where you've got to go do a bit of research, get some information analysis and bring it back. And again, you don't need to fully rely on this, but it at least starts to build the framework of what you're going to do in the audit. And again, I don't know about you, Pete, but I always think like laws and reg docs are always a bit weak because the stuff that goes on there is like, health and safety, minimum wage, all this kind of stuff. And you don't tend to get down into the nitty gritty of like, what are the real pieces
100%.
of the regulations that really apply to this business, unless you've got someone that really is genned up on that industry or something. So that is where you get the real power of these things as well. When it comes to the fieldwork phase, there's a whole bunch of tools out there which lots of people will probably be familiar with, like Data Snipper, like Inflow, and others, which are trying to just streamline the process of doing the audit work, whether that's picking samples or doing the actual testing, or whether it's trying to audit by exception using the data analytics functionality. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. And I guess in this realm of unlimited or uncapped sample sizes and a move to kind of trying to take a more data-driven approach to this, that is the way of the world, and that's the way that regulators want us to go. And then I think when it comes to kind of wrapping up and the finalization of the audit work, again, we talked about financial statement checking and the ability to do that. That's really key. I would say that you can also potentially use a model for the review work. Now that might not feel particularly comfortable for a lot of people, but I built, for example, an audit manager GPT that I know that you've seen, Pete, and played around with a little bit. And whilst I wouldn't say that you 100% rely on that, I would say from the point of view of kind of almost using it as like a training tool for your junior staff to maybe put some of their audit work through and get some feedback on before it comes to the real manager or the real partner, I think that's a potential like high value thing. The likelihood is in the future we're going to see more of this, because we are going to see more and more models and AI reviewing the work of other AI, or AI reviewing the work of other human beings and giving feedback and input. And that's going to require quite a big mindset shift, I think. I think the only thing you can say about audit for sure is, for the time being at least, the regulator isn't going to allow a robot to sign an audit report for the time being. So there is always going to be a need for an RI, but potentially maybe there's not going to be a need for a human being other than that in the audit process in the future.
Yeah, no, but again, I think linking back to where we were at the start of this conversation, I suppose there's this thing, isn't it, about making sure that you are, challenging what's coming out, and it's certainly trying to query talent. And it's back to that again, that analogy that I picked up on that Institute webinar about treating it almost like a really enthusiastic audit junior. So rather than just taking it as a golden bullet, which is going to just give you everything you need, it's just providing something to sort of push against, or to some extra context, I suppose, really, in terms of how things are working. Yeah. But I'm just conscious that certainly in the audit space, I mean, ISA compliance to me feels really burdensome. Can you do any audit these days for less than about $7,000? Probably not. It costs you $7,000 just to open up a file and fill in all the forms. So anything we can do might help, streamline that process. Why not?
Yeah, and I think also, again, we talk about where a large language model is really going to perform well, and it is almost in that kind of conversational research thing in terms of being able to challenge. And I know, for example, that the ISAs require you to kind of consult with specialists and ask questions and stuff. And I guess if you're operating in a small practice like I used to when I trained, there aren't that many people to consult.
No.
And almost in some respects, ChatGPT is a really good thing to consult. And I do know that we've had some RIs in the past, and I've done it as well, where you just throw a concept out there and say, do you know what, I'm not quite sure about this. Can you check? I don't know. Can you check whether this works from a going concern point of view? And you can just throw a few ideas around, or almost sort of see what sticks. And it allows you to ask different questions, or even actually sometimes you're challenged with different responses back, and given something that maybe you hadn't thought about. And that for me is no different from consulting with someone else in the practice. Or it might even, again, as we kind of said before, it might build the framework of what you kind of work from before you then go and consult with someone else, because it just gives you a broader sense of what you could think about. And the great thing about a lot of these models is you can upload things like the ISAs into them. You can upload some of the other frameworks into them. So you don't just have to rely on it doing an internet search. You can give it very specific parameters and frameworks to work to, and just say, right, look, here's I don't know, an ISA on this. Can you give me a summary? Here's my premise of what I'm trying to do. Can you give me a summary of this and what else I should be thinking about? That is really powerful, particularly when it comes to things like questions about professional judgment, questions around whether or not we've challenge some of the assumptions
Yeah,
and things, and so that I think is hugely powerful. And whether you rely on that and sort of document it in your own words, or whether you rely on that and then consult with someone else, I think that's a really powerful sort of tool to be able to enable you to do something else.
yeah, good, good. Look, I've got to ask you one final question. I'm going to let you go. Really so good practical insights there, and I think it's been a really interesting sort of conversation. Just perhaps in terms of what I do regularly read is that perhaps where people and where firms perhaps go wrong is that perhaps in terms of use of generative AI, people really haven't got the skills, and it's like that point you're making about driving the car into the field. I mean, just in terms of people getting trained on how to use these tools effectively and in a way they can do that in an easy and cost-effective way. What would your top tip, if someone's looking to this and thinking that I'm quite inspired to get my team up the curve here, what would people be looking to do to try and develop these skills?
Yeah, so I think training is an absolute must, for two reasons really. Firstly, because I think well, certainly there's things that I see when you kind of watch the stream of things on LinkedIn where people go, "Oh, generative AI is a load of rubbish," or look how badly it did this. More often than not, the reason it's done that is for one of two reasons. It's either done it because the prompts that they've been given is rubbish and hasn't
Yeah,
asked the right questions to get the right kind of answer, or or actually they've just asked it to do something that it's not capable of doing. Maths is a classic example of this. Like, large language models are predictive models. They're not calculation models. And so it's a little bit like trying to write a letter in Excel. You would never do that, or hopefully you would never do that. But it's a little bit like the flip side of that. You're trying to get Excel to do something else that it shouldn't be doing, and it's the same with a large language model. The good thing about this is that there is a whole bunch of free training now available out there. All of the large language model providers, whether it's OpenAI with ChatGPT, whether it's Google with Gemini, all have free to use kind of training and resources around how to build prompts, how to challenge the models, how to work through assumptions and various other bits and pieces. Obviously, that works if you're kind of one of those people that's willing to kind of go and find that training and then consume it online, because it's all like that. I know that there are a few like in-person trainers out there that you can access, who are delivering sort of specific things around understanding the models and then doing some training. The ICAW have some fairly decent resources. I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's some very complex hypothetical stuff in there, but there is some very good basic information available too. And then the other thing, ironically, is you can actually ask these models.
okay,
One of the things that we did when we did training internally was to actually sort of say, right, how do I get the model to help me to be better? And we were sort of using that for all sorts of things, from building out a prompt to do a specific task, or to kind of help us to work through a process. And this is the great thing about them, is they are in some ways, because of the nature of the information they've got, educational. And so even if you just jumped into ChatGPT tomorrow, took the free version and said, hey, right, like I want to use this to do X, Y, and Z. What do you think? Where are the limitations? What are the strengths? How would I frame maybe some of the prompts and the questions that I need to throw at it? It will give you all that response. And it should also tell you, hey, if you're going to upload client confidential information, don't do it in a free model. And so that's kind of the thing to do. Like I say, I think that the basics though are, if you want to do anything that's going to involve client information or anything remotely sort of personal or confidential, you must have a paid model, unless you're using Copilot. Copilot itself has its own positives and negatives and limitations. So again, that's the thing. But equally, you can also do research using these models and sort of compare and contrast and things. But I think, for me, choose a model. Doesn't really matter what it is. Choose one that makes life as simple as possible for you, that's as consumable as possible. And then make sure you've got a paid for version. I mean, most of them start around about $20, £20 a month. I don't think that's a huge investment for
no,
something that you can do. And then the big challenge for you, for anyone, is actually just finding the time to maybe to
Mm.
try these things and experiment a little bit. But what I would do is, try and listen to some of the other practices that have done this. Try and find some more information and figure out what's available. And also, and finally, vendors are starting to come to the market more and more with these products inbuilt into them. And generative AI is going to form a big backbone of their products. There is quite a lot of marketing nonsense as well that accompanies that in some respects, but this is there. And so I think if you have a technology strategy or maybe an AI strategy, kudos to you. If you don't, I would maybe have a think about what that should look like for you and your practice. And don't write it down, because if you write it down today, it'll be old
Yeah.
tomorrow. But at least set out your kind of stall in terms of, do I want to be right at the cutting edge of the marketplace, which for some people is very uncomfortable and for others is very exciting, or do I want to sort of follow the market and just wait for vendors and other people to kind of give me everything pretty much on a plate, which again is equally as acceptable. There is no right or wrong with this. Or do I want to be sort of maybe somewhere in the middle between those 2 points, and just figure out how you want to go about it? I think that's the one area where I find that a lot of practices fail, is they just don't have a strategy and they don't have approach. And so what happens is they're quite passive as a consequence of these changes, and then wonder why they're not maybe getting the benefits of some of these other things.
Absolutely.
Being strategic about it, and like I say, it doesn't have to be written down, it just has to be, this is what we want to try and achieve, and this is the direction of travel we want to go in. I guess it's more of a vision than a strategy, but that should be tied into everything that you do.
Brilliant. John, it's been an absolute pleasure. As always, it's been really, really informative, and there's some really good practical insights there. And hopefully that's going to give people a really good taster, and even for those who are already quite well up the curve, some good insights there into other things that they might do. So thank you so much for your time this morning. It's really good to chat to you.
Thanks,
and we're going to be, I think, involving in our program next year. So we'll see you again next year. And but thanks again for your time. Really, really much appreciated.
Thanks very much. Great.
Okay.